All right. Well, now that you've already spoiled part of my story, I'll give you the details of what happened in that particular game with Danny Dichio. And I'm going to give you a bonus story because it also involves this game. But I'm not going to tell you what it is because you're going to find out, like Andrew will, when I tell the story. So I've purposely titled this story vaguely, but we will be talking about New England Revolution versus Toronto FC, the game on October 20th, 2007. The New England Revolution took on the New Boys in Toronto FC on the final game of the 2007 season. It was honestly a completely meaningless game for both sides. Toronto had slightly more to play for in the fact that they could potentially avoid winning the wooden spoon with the result here. However, New England was already locked in at the 2 seed in the East behind DC United. Despite that fact, we somehow got two moments that ended up as part of this history series. Who would have thought? Let's dive a little bit more into the history before we jump into the game itself. So, Andrew focused a lot on the New England side of things. I'm going to focus on the Toronto side of things. As mentioned before, Toronto was coming into their first ever season in MLS, with MLS veterans like Jeff Cunningham, likely the most recognizable name on the roster. However, another player that would make a name for themselves was Maurice Adu. He's not relevant to the story, but I felt he still deserved the shout out. Toronto would look to right the mistakes of recent inaugural expansion sides who flopped big time in their first year. The start of the season was not a strong indication of them righting the wrongs of expansion teams. Toronto would go on to lose their first four games without scoring a single goal. And this was a sign of things to come, as Toronto would have a disastrous season that at one point saw them go winless in 12 straight games. The last game of the season was an opportunity to give the fans one last thing to cheer for, especially since they were playing at home. As Andrew mentioned, New England, on the other hand, was coming in with the opposite going for them. They were locked into their sixth straight season of making the playoffs, with five of those six seasons seeing them as at least the top two seed in the East. Talk on to the fact that New England's first ever trophy in the 2007 US Open Cup, and the team was definitely looking strong this season. As mentioned before, going into this game against Toronto, there was probably only one thing in mind: don't get hurt before the playoffs. So let's begin with the game. Toronto would line up with both the aforementioned Cunningham and Adu starting the game, whereas New England would also run out a strong lineup with the likes of Taylor Twellman and Matt Reese highlighting the side. The game had no goals through almost the entirety of the first half and was surely looking like it would stay that way with Toronto on the ball in the 45th +2 and not much pressure being applied by New England. However, that was about to change in the blink of an eye. Toronto brings the ball to midfield and then carelessly gives the ball away. However, New England is not in any bit of a threatening position, meaning the game is still likely to go to halftime 0-0. But before Toronto can even blink, the New England player who made the interception was shooting the ball towards the goal from their own half. There's nothing any of the outfield players on either side can do at this point but stand and watch the ball as it soars towards the Toronto goal. Toronto goalkeeper Kyriakos Stamatopoulos, likely caught off guard, stumbles backwards to try and save the shot, screaming towards his goal. And with one last ditch dive attempt, Stamatopoulos would just be out of reach, watching the ball fly into the net to give New England a seemingly impossible lead. Now, there was one key detail I left out of the story. Who scored the goal? Go ahead and take your guesses. Maybe it's their leading scorer for like the last 6 years in Taylor Twellman. How about another all-time New England forward in Pat Noonan? Both wrong. Try a 23-year-old Michael Parkhurst scoring his first goal of his career from his own half. Yeah, what an absolutely legendary way to score your first ever goal. That's how the score would stay going into the half, with New England leading 1-0. During halftime, Toronto head coach Mo Johnston would sub out struggling Jeff Cunningham to bring on the club's leading scorer, Danny Dichio. Now, you might be asking yourself, what kind of head coach wouldn't be starting their leading scorer? And that's a fair question. Well, this was because this was Dichio's first game back after having missed the last 8 regular season games due to injury. So the team was slowly working him back into games. Keep all of this in mind because it will be important later. The second half would not waste any time getting into the action, as this time New England's star boy Taylor Twellman would get his 16th goal of the season, scoring a header off a corner. After that goal, I'm sure there were a lot of Toronto fans in the stadium beginning to feel that here we go again feeling, as Toronto was staring right in the face of yet another defeat. However, today happened to be the day Colin Samuel became a powerlifter, because with the weight of defeat looming over the stadium, Samuel would score in the 59th minute to help lift that weight and breathe hope into the Toronto crowd. 10 minutes go by, no equalizer for Toronto. Then another 10 minutes, and another 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, that glimmer of hope in the 60th minute for a Toronto comeback was looking more and more pale. Stoppage time begins, and it's back to feeling like another defeat was on the horizon. With Toronto pressing for the equalizer, midfielder Carl Robinson headed a pass toward Dichio at the top of the box. He swiveled and one-timed a looping volley over the head of Revolution goalkeeper Matt Reese, which sent the sellout crowd into a frenzy. Yet another moment in this game with a goal coming in stoppage time, and this time it was in the favor of the home side, which sent the crowd wild. This game would finish 2-2 and would look like an absolute nothing burger when looking at the standings and scoreline. But once you dive a little bit deeper into the game, it actually turned out to be an absolute banger. CBC Sports had gotten the chance to interview Dichio after the game, where he was quoted as saying that he wasn't even supposed to have played this game, since he was still coming back from the aforementioned injury. However, head coach Mo Johnston told him to get out there and give it a go. Crazy to think this memorable moment for many Toronto fans may not have even happened had Johnston decided to play it safe and not play Dichio. RSL would go on to beat Colorado on the final day, meaning that despite all this work to come back and get a point in this game, Toronto would unfortunately take home the wooden spoon in their inaugural season. However, at least the team was able to give the fans one nice memory to end the year on.
That was a really nice story you had there, buddy. Like that was very, very touching, very heartwarming.
I
Um,
guess you could say that. I can't imagine Toronto fans still felt good about that season.
I will say
25
that
points is not nothing to write home about.
I will say that I am disappointed that you haven't learned how to sneak Atlanta into things that Atlanta should be snuck into, like
They
I do.
don't exist. What do you mean?
Well, what do you mean? Michael Parkhurst was an Atlanta player.
How do I make mention to Michael Parkhurst being an Atlanta player here?
Maybe you need to listen to me
Do
more.
I just have to say Atlanta United legend Michael Parkhurst scored his first
Correct.
goal?
Yes, you have to make sure that you reference him properly.
Okay, I will start working on that. And I can throw in a Greek goalkeeper reference to Atlanta too.
Oh, Mr.
Tambakis.
Tambakis. Yeah,
Yeah. Look at
very nice.
that. See, I'm making up for it now with the Atlanta references for anybody that's still listening at this point.
Too bad we're cutting it.